When you need someone to talk to and you don't know what to do, call us 421-4400. When you're feeling all alone and they turn their back on you, call us 421-4400. Call us 421-4400. Call us 421-4400. Call us.
This is the Kind Counseling Podcast with your host, Cammie Roberts. Kind Counseling is a mental health practice that gives hope to the hopeless through mental health empowerment and spiritual insight. Today we have a wonderful podcast with two great guests to discuss the topic to vote or not to vote. And we're doing this show to educate our community on the subject of voting in this upcoming as well as future elections. Politics and politicians can be extremely influential on the mental health of their constituents, so I wanted to give some information and insight on this topic. Also, I've had several clients struggle with anxiety over the last election because of their concerns around the outcome of the last election. So I just wanted to give some insight. And today, I have two wonderful guests, and I wanted to introduce them. First, we have Mr. Gregory Ajosi, who is a criminal defense attorney with over 10 years experience practicing in New York criminal and Supreme Courts. Prior to becoming an attorney, he was a member of the New York City Police Department for over 15 years, retiring with the rank of sergeant. In the course of representing an accused person, Gregory will apply his exhaustive knowledge of police procedure and the penal law to the case at hand in order to obtain the best outcome possible for his client. Gregory is a proud veteran of the United States Marine Corps. And also joining us is Mr. Hugh Hamilton. He is a professional journalist, radio host, and public interest advocate whose wide-ranging experience includes more than 3.5 decades of international reporting in both print and broadcast media. He is also a former legislative director to two members of the New York City Council and is currently an independent communications strategist and policy advisor to several community development organizations. So let's welcome our guests today. All right. Fellows, it's nice to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Good afternoon to you, Cammie, and good afternoon to you, Gregory. Pleasure to meet you, sir.
All right.
And same here. I'm very happy to be able to participate in this podcast, Cammie. Thank you for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to meet you as well, Hugh.
Sure. All right. So first of all, just real basic stuff we want to tackle. Why is voting in any election important, local or presidential? Why is it important? If you guys could just talk a little bit about that. Either one of you can go first.
Okay, I'll jump first. My answer to that question, whenever, and it is one that comes up very often. Why should I? Why even bother? Well, because as Barack Obama very famously said right after he was elected in 2008, because elections have consequences. And those consequences, for good or for bad, are our everyday business. It is the most compelling reason for us to vote. I often point to the fact that there are, if you can identify 3 or 4 or half a dozen of the issues that are most important to you, the things that directly affect your quality of life on a day-to-day basis, I can show you how any single one of those things is directly related to public policy, which is a function of the electoral and political process. So there's a straight line between voting, public policy, and the day-to-day circumstances in which we find ourselves. Quick example, the median black family today in this country owns about $3,600 in wealth, which is, when you subtract your debt from whatever assets you have, what is remaining? Your wealth. The average black family today, the median black family, has about $3,600 in wealth today, which is roughly 2% of the $147,000 in wealth that the median white family owns. The median Latino family has assets worth about $6,000, which is just 4% as much as the median white family. In other words, the median white family has 41 times more wealth than the median black family and 22 times more wealth than the median Latino family. What does that have to do with politics? I can show that that is directly related to a history of public policy that has intentionally advantaged and favored one group of people on the basis of skin color and their belonging to that group, while intentionally disadvantaging the black and Latino and other communities of color. So voting becomes a direct response to addressing that reality.
Okay.
Well, I think the discussion around voting has been reduced to a zero-sum game. It's like the popular refrain that's parroted often is "vote or die," and I think the right to vote is sacrosanct. I mean, it took a constitutional amendment preceded by a civil war to ensure that people of U.S. citizens of African descent had that right, and so it is a precious right. However, at the same time, it's a resource to be allocated and directed when and where it's going to be most effective. And I think that while the right to vote is very important and non-negotiable, that we should have that right, our vote should be dispensed very, very judiciously. And I think part of the problem in the United States today is that, one particular political party has taken for granted that they're going to receive the black vote and that they don't have to do anything to earn that vote. We're not courted, we're not wooed, and then after an election, little to nothing is delivered to our community. And sometimes, like another old chestnut, you have to take one step back in order to take two steps forward. And I'm of the mind that in particular elections, that it's advisable to as a community, say we're going to withhold our vote unless we get concrete assurances, not rhetoric and not pie in the sky promises, but some concrete assurances that our concerns will be addressed, and the vote should be coupled with other actions as well, political action committees that are laser focused on issues that are specific to the black community, where we can funnel dollars into candidates. One of the things I find so interesting about celebrities, that often celebrities and rich people, is that you find often that they don't vote, but what they do is funnel money to candidates. And because in the United States we have a secret ballot, I can tell you I'm going to vote for you, and you don't know whether I vote for you or not, but when you get a check with my name on it, a donation, and the money is what grants access to power, and money is what ensures that there'll be a listening ear in the corridors of power. So I think that a conversation about voting without talking about donating to campaigns and financing candidates who will pursue agendas that are sympathetic and in line with your community needs, those discussions have to go hand in hand.
Okay.
Excellent point. As a matter of fact, I know Greg has put a number of very important issues on the table. I particularly like the point about political action committees and the need for communities to organize around their issues and to use that organization through political action to leverage their numbers and their voting power as a bloc, and to use the vote judiciously. I could not agree more. The vote must be used judiciously and strategically. However, to my mind, the question of whether to vote is one that is also grounded in the reality that there's so many of us who are directly affected by these public policies who cannot vote for whatever reason. People who are not citizens, for example. the millions of people who are disenfranchised through felony disfranchisement. There are over 5 million people right now, American citizens, who are ineligible to vote because they live in one of the 11 states that have taken away the vote from persons who have been convicted of a felony and who have been incarcerated. So even after having served their sentences, they are still nevertheless sentenced to a state of second-class citizenship in which they're not allowed to vote. So I agree that we need to use the vote judiciously. I also am very concerned about the role of money in the political process, which Greg spoke about. And he's entirely correct. If I can make a direct contribution to someone who's running for public office, that person sees my name on a check, and that guarantees me a certain amount of access. That is correct. However, we can also use those resources and channel them differently to support candidates of our own choice. And this conversation, this quadrennial discourse that we have, whenever there's a presidential election, whether to vote or not to vote, we need to bear in mind that the political process does not emerge out of nowhere every 4 years. It is an ongoing process in which we can become more involved at every stage of the game. For example, there's a direct relationship between the census, since the Trump administration has just forced a premature end to the census. There's a direct relationship between the census and the weight and power of the black vote through the redistricting process, which of course is tied to the apportionment process, which is determined by the census. So there's a straight line, whichever way you look at it, between voting, political activism, public policy, and the circumstances in our everyday lives.
Well, Greg, you brought up a good point. And my next question is, if politicians are, quote unquote, bought off by big companies or billionaires to push their agendas, how is the average man served by voting these politicians in?
Well, if I can, say that I think that when we use the term politicians, the tendency is to think of a president, a senator, a governor. But in reality, the local school board, the local district attorney, the local civil court judge who's sitting in criminal court, they have a greater and wider impact on the lives of day-to-day lives of black people than any congressman, senator, or governor. And yet off-year elections have the lowest voter turnout, and those candidates are not don't have big coffers of money. They're regular people, low-level politicians. They're people running, local people running for office, and yet they're being put in office by literally a fraction of the electorate, and so I think the national corporate media, because I call them the national corporate media, because the media is a for-profit organization that is beholden to shareholders and has an agenda to increase ratings and advertising revenue. So they push a narrative. They have a platform that's inescapable and unavoidable, and everyone's ears perk up and they pay attention to a national election. But when the school board, the district attorney, the city council, no one is paying, the New York State legislators, because we live in New York, no one pays attention to those elections. And those are the people, you're more likely to find a white supremacist running and winning a seat on the school board. That's where there's white supremacists. That's what, ensuring that funds are not making their way into black school districts. You have white supremacist judges, you have white supremacist county district attorneys who are throwing black men and women and children in jail willy-nilly, and not being those politicians not being held accountable because no one thinks to throw them out of office or direct a challenge against them or donate or fund a opposition to those politicians. So I think that less attention should be paid, because once you get to the level of presidential politics, they're all drawn. This is my opinion, of course, that those candidates all come from the same socioeconomic strata. They all go to the same schools. They belong to the same clubs, the same fraternal organizations. They are far removed from us as King Louis XIV was from a typical peasant in Paris, in the 17th century, so the 18th century. So I think that I'm of the mind to, the presidential election is the least important election to vote in. It's the off-year elections that we should be paying close attention to, and because those politicians are not the ones with the big money, and those are the ones that we can impact and actually find a way to pierce through that veil of money.
Okay.
I hesitate to go as far as Greg has gone in saying that the presidential election is the least important of the entire slate of elections in which one could and should participate. But I do take the point that he has made very eloquently, that there are all these off-year elections and all these seemingly minor positions for which the turnout is abysmally low year after year. Take, for example, Greg mentioned the school board. Now, black students in this country account for about 15% of the total student population, but they make up 35% of all students who are suspended once, 44% of students who are suspended more than once, and 36% of all students who are expelled. Why is it then that black students are so disproportionately punished by the school system? Well, that goes to Greg's point, which is who are the people we're electing to serve on the school boards? Who are the people being elected to serve in the state legislatures that set policy and set public education policy? Because remember that even though we have a federal Department of Education, education essentially is a state function. And education is also tied to the quality of education is also tied to where you live, and that brings us to the fact that here in New York we live in one of the most segregated cities in the country. New York City, Long Island is 10 times worse now because of residential segregation and the fact that school districts are tied to where you live. What that now means is that over the course of history, we see that the funding of schools has followed a pattern in which the resources are disproportionately invested in white communities, while black communities and communities of color are systematically neglected. The answer to that, of course, would be to vote in your election for mayor, for city council, for state assembly, for state senator, because that is where the policy is made, both in terms of education and education spending, as well as in the area of residential opportunity and who gets to live in which communities, and what are the barriers that are placed to people attempting to purchase homes in communities in our local jurisdictions. We no longer have a formal redlining policy, but we do have a de facto redlining policy in many respects. Okay,
all right. Greg, you want to respond or?
No, I mean it's correct. I mean what he was saying is I co-sign on that.
Okay. So, all right. So as we approach November, right, and you guys are mentioning the importance of the local elections, what are the major issues that you think black New Yorkers should focus on when going to the ballot box? What are the major issues you guys would say that they need to focus on?
Well, again, I go back to my mantra of voting downstream. You know, looking what are there initiatives on the ballot? Are there local races to be decided? I live in a congressional district that the incumbent is facing a strong challenge, but I think that those are what we should be focusing on. I think that New York is solidly Democratic, and Biden is going to carry New York. So, one or two votes in the other direction, I don't think it would make a difference, in terms of whether or not he's going to carry New York. So for a New Yorker, I think that the main concern for a black New Yorker, to be specific, should be, criminal justice issues. The city council, what are your city councilmen's positions on criminal justice matters? Your state legislators, what's their position on bail reform? After passing bail reform last year, some of the state legislators are now backtracking because of the outcry from this police union, from the PBA, and their supporters, from conservative news outlets, from business outlets, business interests. Is your local assemblyman and state senator now backpedaling on bail reform? Marijuana legalization, what are their positions on that? Do they have a concrete position about decriminalization tied into expunging the criminal records of people who have previous convictions for marijuana offenses? And of course, the school boards now in the course of the COVID, what is your school board's position on remote learning, funding remote learning, ensuring that no children are left behind, ensuring internet access for children who are doing remote learning? Just this week, the New York City Schools Chancellor made an announcement that they want to institute so-called random COVID testing of school children, and with the caveat that it's consensual. You have to, they won't test anyone without your consent, with the parent's consent. However, if a parent doesn't give consent, the child will have to do all remote learning and won't be permitted to come into the school. So these are issues that we have to pay close attention to, and not be distracted by the dog and pony show that is the presidential election.
All right.
Excellent points there from Greg on the importance of downstream voting, and some of those local offices, for mayor, city council, and other locally elected officials. I could not agree more. On the other hand, though, I think that we cannot we cannot downplay the importance of a presidential election. Two issues. The census. We just concluded the census, which the president and his attorney general and his commerce secretary, they went to court, and they successfully sought to have the census terminated earlier than would have been the case. Now, the president is now attempting to do, this President Trump is now attempting to do two things. One of which is going to be heard in court shortly. The Supreme Court is going to have a hearing on it, which is he wants to have persons who are undocumented immigrants removed from the census count. Why is that important? Because the number of people, there are trillions of dollars that are allocated every 10 years over the course of any 10-year period that are directly tied to the census and to the apportionment of congressional districts, which of course is also based on the population. By removing a significant number of people who are undocumented immigrants, or who are deemed to be undocumented, because remember, there was no citizenship question and no residency, immigrant status question on the census. Therefore, what he's attempting to do is to use extraneous data from his own executive branch in order to essentially diminish the potential voting power of communities of color by removing significant numbers of people who reside in those areas, but by not having them counted. Remember, we went through this with the 3/5 rule before in the Constitution. This idea that some people count less than some other people, and in this case, he wants to have some people counted not at all. let's take a look at health care, which is another issue that the Supreme Court is going to be taking a look at. I believe on November 10th, they're going to have a hearing on the future of the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. That is an issue that is directly important to us as communities of color. Black women, for example, are 3 or 4 times more likely to experience a pregnancy-related death than white women, even when they have similar levels of income and education. There are a number of ways in which we can see the disparity in the access to health care between communities of color and white Americans. Now, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, made it possible for millions of previously uninsured people to have access to some level of care. The Republicans have been attempting ever since the passage ever since they acceded to a majority in the legislature, attempted to use their power both in the Senate and in the courts, using the federal courts, which they've successfully packed federal judges by over 200 federal judges appointed by Trump. Why? Because McConnell systematically blocked the appointment and any hearings for judges under Obama. This all comes down now to, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but it comes down to the power of the federal elected officials, their ability to control and to control the public agenda by stocking the courts with their own judges, whether it's the federal circuit courts or whether it's the U.S. Supreme Court. So these issues are riding directly on the outcome of this presidential election, and I think that they ought to be of some concern to communities of color and to Black Americans in particular.
Yeah, but I think instead of trying to hit that problem at the top, we have to take some steps back. Because what happens, I think, is, the present administration takes note of the fact that the localities and cities with the highest concentration of undocumented most often are localities and cities headed up by Democrat administrations. And so rather than try to woo, and of course I would venture to guess, I think it's safe to posit that the large majority of undocumented people are Black. They are from South America, Mexico, Central America, Asia. They're what we term people of color, if not all Black. And rather than trying to woo that population, their attitude is, let's just excise them and make sure that they cannot that they're not in a position to pose a political and economic threat to the conservative or Republican status quo. And on the other hand, the Democrats take it for granted that the voting bloc of color will gravitate to them, so they in turn don't do anything to woo us and to get us to ensure that we'll be an engaged electorate and ensure that each trying to win us over each election cycle. And I think that's why part of being judicious with the vote means that you have a chance to get our vote if you institute policies that benefit us. So instead of trying to always eliminate us and cut us out and hamstring us, come and try and woo us because we're open to being wooed. There's an anecdote that I read a long time ago. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but it was under I believe the administration of George H.W. Bush. I think James Baker was a high official in his administration, and at some point this topic was broached about doing things for a particular community, and supposedly that high official, it's attributed to Baker, said, "F them, they didn't vote for us. They don't vote for us anyway." And that's the thing. I think that's the issue that the Republicans have with the Black community by and large. Is that F them, they don't vote for us anyway. And the Democrats are like, F them, they're going to vote for us no matter what we do. And that leads to policies like I mean, there's other factors behind it. I'm sure there's some measure of racial animus and whatnot behind it, but that's definitely a factor in the policies. Again, that's just my opinion of the administration and in trying to, in stopping the census count, trying to undercount the population of largely Democrat urban areas. So and that's why, again, just coming back around full circle, why it's not just not showing up at the polls or not just voting in the presidential election. It's making sure that it's understood. It's not that we don't respect the right to vote and want to exercise the vote, but we're not going to just give it away. And unless and until you make some policies that specifically address our issues, we are not going to vote for you. And I get, as a student of history, I get so annoyed when people say the worst administration in history. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Abraham Lincoln, totally dismantled and did away with Reconstruction, and black people and African people survived that, and survived 150 years of black codes and Jim Crow and lynching and whatnot. So and every one of the presidents, had some type of anti-black animus in them, differing only in degree. So, if Trump gets in, we'll get through that. It's like we've gotten through every other slave-owning, racist, past former slave-owning president that this country has had. And I just don't. I feel like my intelligence is insulted when I'm told that it's going to be the end of the world if this man is reelected. It's the end of the world for us every day. We leave our house, we have to wonder if today is the end of our world. Is my kid going to get suspended? Am I going to get fired? Am I going to get pulled over from police? Am I going to get falsely accused? So to say, the sky is falling, it's the end of the world because he gets in, it's to not see the forest for the trees, in my opinion.
Okay, powerful points, and you're right. Black people have survived all of those travels, but at what cost? At a very, very high and a really terrible cost. And I think that the issue then has got to be, what is it that we can do proactively? What is it that we need to do in order to identify the areas in which we can be more assertive with our vote, in which we can be more strategic with our vote, and in which we can more directly influence public policy. I do not believe that it is a question of whether you're voting for the lesser of two evils in a situation like this. I think it's a question of voting for your own interest. And it seems to me that in this particular election, the choice is very clear. Is Biden the candidate who I would have loved to see emerge out of this political process? Would he have been my number one pick? No, for a number of reasons. However, we have what we have, and what we have are an incumbent who, quite frankly, and I'm not a psychoanalyst of any kind, but who is not only unhinged, but who clearly is, and this is more in Kami's wheelhouse, of course, but who clearly is showing signs of being seriously having significant psychological deficits. And having such a person in the White House is dangerous not only for black people, but indeed for, quite frankly, for world peace. So and for international security. So I cannot in good conscience do anything that would even remotely be construed as allowing the possibility of having the incumbent returned to office. The alternative is not necessarily what I would have dreamed of, but it is, in my view, there's no contest.
You're listening to the Kind Counseling Podcast. Feel free to hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now back to the show. Greg, you want to respond?
As I just reiterate what I said previously, I don't think he's. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't think it could get any worse than it's been. I think that I'm big on intellectual and honesty and being logically consistent. One of the things about statistics is that when I voted for Obama, and like many other African Americans, people of African descent, absolutely thrilled that a black man could ascend to the highest office in the land. And then when you closely examine the data of his administration, the number of deportations exceeded any previous Republican administration, and certainly has exceeded the deportations conducted by the Trump administration. The number of black men incarcerated, the numbers didn't drop. During his administration, they increased. The number of black men killed by police officers was well, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but if there was a drop in those numbers during his administration, I wasn't aware of it. The subprime lending crisis, if I'm not mistaken, occurred during his tenure, which disproportionately impacted black homeowners. So, I think blacks have suffered under administrations that were, at least on the surface, sympathetic to us, and in some regards, it's somewhat refreshing to deal with an administration that tells you where they're coming from. That's like that chestnut about I prefer someone to stab me in the front instead of stabbing me in the back. And I was a member. I was an enlisted U.S. Marine, and stationed in North Carolina, stationed in Virginia, stationed in South Carolina, and for me it was refreshing. After growing up in New York City and dealing with two-faced people who held anti-black sentiments and anti-black hostility, but masqueraded behind a progressive liberalism. It was kind of refreshing to deal with people who told me right off the bat. At least I knew where they were coming from right away, and I could avoid them. I could adjust my routine, to avoid them and keep myself safe, as opposed to walking into a trap every day. Here in New York City. But again, those are my own personal musings. Again, I just think that, and I'm trying to flesh out that common phrase. Oh, they're all alike. They're the same bird with two different feathers, because that's an oversimplification of the issue. The issue is that the people who inhabit that socio-economic, political world, they come from a particular strata. They hold, by and large, certain views. They are experts they're very eloquent, they're very polished, and they're able to, urinate on you and tell you it's raining. And what Hugh talks about a psychological deficit in Trump, I think it's more of no filter. His filter is faulty. He doesn't have the same filter that his peers have, and so he blurts out what all of them are thinking, or they only say behind closed doors.
Hugh,
Okay.
guys, Hugh,
Yeah.
you want to respond, Hugh?
Well, I mean, look, it's these points. I don't see this as either or, because I think it is possible for more than one thing to be true, and I think that many of the things that Greg is saying are obviously true, as are many of the things that I'm saying, and the fact that these truths can coexist. I suppose the answer to this is to figure out, well, given all of these facts, where do we go from here? How do we? I heard Greg mention, for example, being stationed in South Carolina. 61% in February, 61% of the eligible voters in South Carolina, African American voters, that is 61%, voted for Biden in what was then still a very large field of Democratic candidates who were running in the primary. And I would be very interested in hearing, Greg, what your analysis is of how that turned out, because that, as you know, was the turning point for Biden. It is generally acknowledged that Biden would have been dead in the water politically had it not been for South Carolina. That was the turning point when South Carolinians gave him a victory, beating second place Bernie Sanders by over 30 points. And clearly, the black vote, the black Americans have demonstrated their ability to influence the national political discourse and direction in a fundamental way, given what happened in South Carolina. So the question is, how do we use that power strategically, which is the point that Greg keeps making, and it's an excellent point. Using that power strategically, how do we organize that power to be able to use it strategically, to advance our own interests?
Well, I think that, and again, I do not have numbers in front of me, and so a lot of what I say is conjecture on my part, but I attribute Biden's win in South Carolina during the primary to the efficacy of the Democratic machine, and coupling that with a populace in a largely rural state, older voters, older African American voters, that a certain he wouldn't campaign with Cardi B in that type of area of the country, but so he campaigned with older black preachers and reverends and church leaders and knew, the machine did what the establishment machine has been doing for years. I mean, they had great success in that type of area of the country with that particular subset of the electorate, and I think when it comes to the African American electorate, the Democratic Party has a playbook that includes entertainers, it includes popular culture figures, it includes churches and church officials and black clergy, and they know what place to call given any situation. Meaning the situation, meaning the audience that they have, and it's not necessary. And again, this is obviously I'm just speaking for myself. It's I don't believe it's a reflection of their policies or their willingness to commit to an agenda that addresses African American needs. I think it's just marketing 101. That they've become very good over the years at marketing. There's the establishment candidates to the African American electorate.
Well, go ahead, you.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that what Greg is also introducing into the conversation here is a much larger issue, which is the fact that we think of an election as the thing that happens on November 3rd or whatever the date is in November, that we go to the polls, or in this case, that we mail in our ballots or do early voting or however it is that we choose to participate in that electoral process. But the electoral process is a vast and interrelated system of rules and regulations involving thousands of jurisdictions all over the country, and it is an extremely complex and extremely complicated canvas. And part of the ability to use our vote strategically lies in understanding how that system works. For example, seemingly unrelated things. Obama was elected in 2008. In Shelby County against Holder, Holder being Mr. Obama's, President Obama's Attorney General. Shelby County, Alabama, went to court to challenge the Voting Rights Act, specifically Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which required that certain states, which as of 1964 had different kinds of had a history of intentional disfranchisement of black people, that they, in order for them to make any kinds of changes to their electoral systems, they first of all had to obtain preclearance from the Justice Department or from a court in D.C. Now, they've been trying to do this for a long time. This was a backlash against the election of Obama. This went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act by invalidating Section 4B, I think it is, which is the formula for for determining which jurisdictions would be subject to the preclearance provision. In doing so, that happened around 2013, I believe. In almost immediately throughout the South, what you saw was that state legislatures now began to systematically dismantle the apparatus of electoral politics in communities of color. They began by insisting on things like voter IDs. What kind of voter ID do you use? Well, for most people, it's a driver's license. What did they do? They shut down hundreds of DMVs, motor vehicle offices in communities of color. They closed off a number of polling sites in communities of color, thereby making it more difficult for black people to be able to exercise the vote. This and a wide range of voter suppression tactics were implemented in the 7 years or so since then. The result now is that in many parts of this country, for black people even to be able to get to the polls to vote, they now have to jump such a high hurdle that it effectively not only suppresses but quite literally disenfranchises entire communities. How does that happen? Well, you've got the courts, the federal courts, where Shelby was first heard, all the way up to the Supreme Court. You've got the Supreme Court, where the judges are nominated by whoever the president is. You've got the legislative branch at the federal level, the Senate, which confirms those judges when, as we are seeing right now, with the rush to confirm Amy Coney Barrett. You've got state legislatures who have the power every 10 years to draw district lines for congressional apportionment and so forth, and who also, and local officials as well, acting in concert with state officials to dismantle the apparatus of the electoral process in a way that disadvantages, intentionally disadvantages black people and other communities of color. So you see how at all of these different levels, how they all come together acting in concert against the interests of black people. And so the question that I have, the burning question that I have, is how do we come to that, recognizing the scale of the challenge that we're dealing with?
Well, Hugh, I in that list of actors in the dismantling of the preclearance provision of the Voting Rights Act, you didn't mention the state legislators, and because that's where the legislation that was proposed, to require ID to vote, it was on the state level. So it comes back to if I say I'm going to run for the state assembly or the state senate, National Democratic Party, could you please fund me? They'll say, who are you? Who the heck are you? But if a New York Times or the Daily News, profiles some up and coming city councilman because he would be the first, to check various boxes to unseat an incumbent congressman. National money, he gets national exposure, and national money flows in. But he'll be one of 435 legislators in the House of Representatives. But it's the state legislator who in the state, in the hometown, is the one introducing this legislation that is flying under the radar. It's flying under the radar. It gets proposed under the radar, voted on under the radar, signed and put into effect under the radar, and then till one day somebody in Washington says, "Hey, wait a second, what's going on here?" And then when I say someone in Washington, it could be in the administration, outside of the administration, a watchdog group, a civil rights organization. But no one is saying, you know what? Because it's not sexy and it's not glamorous to be an alderman. Nobody's paying attention to those elections. They're not getting any coverage. They're not getting any airtime. No celebrities are coming in. They're not. Those candidates are not going on MSNBC or CNN. And it makes me wonder about the commitment of a national political party who's content to come in after the fact and make a big hue and cry and show of fighting, when in actuality, an ounce of prevention early on in the process would have resolved the issue, when it was resolvable, as opposed to getting, upheld in the Supreme Court. And now that can be the model for every state across the United States of America to put us in a position where we have the right to vote, but really don't have it, because every state has found some way to ensure that our knees are cut out from under us, and which makes me wonder, and we've kind of shied away from saying Democrat, Republican here, but I'm of the school of thought that the Democratic Party has, in its present iteration, hasn't shown any real concern about the issues that affect African Americans. They show concern about issues that are sexy, that are pull at the heartstrings, that make for good profiles in the national media. But in terms of on the ground, doing the work, no. They prefer to come in after the fact and make a big show of for example, they coming in with money into different jurisdictions. Florida said that they had a referendum in Florida to allow former felons to vote once they've completed their sentence. The state legislature came in and adjusted the law and said that serving your sentence includes paying all fines and court fees that accrued as part of your sentence. So many people default on those fines and court fees, so that they even though they did their time, they're completed their sentence, they're still not eligible to vote. So now a lot of organizations have come in with money and say, okay, we're going to fine these people and pay their court fines, their court fees, so they'll have officially completed their sentence as per the law and be able to vote. So that's the thing, they come in after the fact on the white horse, as if to say, look what we're doing, we're saving you, we're doing the right thing for you. But again, if you're the little guy on the ground in Florida and says, listen, I want to run for office, can you help me out? Who are you? And you're not a celebrity, you're not a preacher, you're not one of our chosen acceptable black candidates, so get out of here. And so this is the issue I have. And so I say, you know what, you're not getting our vote. You're not getting our vote until you're serious about coming into our communities, helping us get into office, get into these positions, and not just your chosen, sexy, nice-looking candidates who check all the identity boxes.
Well, Greg, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that brings us to the current situation with Ice Cube and Donald Trump, which has been of late been a big debate in the black community as to whether it's wise for Ice Cube to even engage Donald Trump for the black vote. So you guys are both familiar with this to some degree, I'm sure. You want to comment on that in terms of, do you feel like Ice Cube is undermining the Democratic Party, or do you feel as though what he's doing is actually something noble to help black people?
anyone, but, or talk too much. But if we're New York City residents, one staple of every election in New York City is that both candidates have to woo for the Hasidic community, for example.
Okay.
No one writes off the Hasidic community, the large Jewish community, and says, well, they're not going to vote for me. Each candidate, but Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green Party, they go to them and they pitch. They make a pitch. Vote for me because this is what I'm going to do for your community. And then the Hasidic community says, the rabbi endorses, whatever candidate. That has to happen with our community as well. We got to be in a position where every candidate talks to us, that every party talks to us, and nobody writes us off. That's the nature of negotiation.
Okay.
You can't negotiate if you have no leverage. You have to be able to say, if you don't do X, Y, and Z for me, I'm going to take my vote over here. Mm-hmm. And over here, they told me A, B, and C. What do you have? Can you counter that? And I look at it, that's what Ice Cube, ostensibly was trying to do.
Okay.
I do not. I have merely a tangential understanding of this Ice Cube issue, and in fact, Kami, if you can just give a synopsis of what is happening here with Ice Cube,
sure,
and what that story is all about, because there might be people in my demographic who are not entirely familiar with what we're talking about here.
All right, so and thanks for bringing that back, Hugh. Ice Cube is a rapper. For those of you who don't know, he is a movie producer, actor. Owner of the Big Three basketball league. It's a successful black businessman, and what he spoke to, according to him, top economists, top educators in the black community, and came up with what's extensively called the contract with Black America. And what he wanted to do was bring this proposal or this contract to both the Republican Party with Donald Trump and the Democratic Party with Biden, to see who would be willing to meet with him or at least try to address some of the issues in the black community. So he, from what I've heard, he presented this. He offered both of them to have a meeting with him. The Biden and his people apparently said, after the election we'll talk. The Trump the Trump administration said, hey, we'll talk to you. Let's see what we can do together. And as a result of that, Ice Cube is now facing a backlash of being called a sellout. And why is he even bothering to talk to Trump? We know Trump is a racist. And Ice Cube basically said, well, I gave both of them a shot. So if this guy's willing to help black people, why shouldn't I talk to him? So that's a... I'm trying to make it as succinct as possible.
Sure. Well, look, if I were advising Trump, which heaven forbid that I should find myself in that situation, but if I were advising Trump, right, I would have said to Trump, "There's a great opportunity for you to gain some visibility." And to use a prominent black person as a way of engaging the extended black community in a direct way. And you literally have nothing to lose. Trump likes that phrase. Remember, back in the last election, he said that black folks should vote for him because what do you have to lose? Well, I would have said to Trump, which obviously his advisor said to him, you have nothing to lose by engaging Ice Cube because you can say anything. We know that Trump will say anything that he needs to say in any given moment, but that his word means it is utterly meaningless because he will say something and moments later he will contradict what he just said and claim not to have said it at all. Right. So I don't know that there is any productive value in Ice Cube engaging Donald Trump in this process. Now, Biden, as you know, is obviously attempting to play it as safe as he can because Biden has also got a number of things going against him. And some people have cynically said that COVID is probably the best thing that could have happened to the Biden campaign because it gave them a very good reason to hide the candidate and to keep him under wraps as much as possible
Wow.
and to limit his exposure for fear that A, he would say something outrageous, which he is given to, which is because, he's now, I don't want to be ageist here, but he's now quite elderly. And while I've had a tremendous amount of respect for his 47 years in public office, and I think he's done some really good things. He's also made some very stupid mistakes, of course, and he's done some things for which he claims to be regretful, such as the crime bill. But if I was in Biden, I would probably advise him as well to just don't get involved in this stuff right now. Wait until after the election. So in short, what I'm saying here is the idea of a contract with Black America, which Ice Cube is advancing, is something that would have been great to have that on the table over these past several years. I'm very happy that such a document exists, and I would be very happy to take a look at it. And I would like that whoever wins this election, and I hope that it is not Mr. Trump, but whoever wins this election, I believe that such a conversation needs to take place and must be front and center, and should be a term and condition for Black support of whoever the candidate is, who will benefit from from the majority of Black votes. Who, in this case, I strongly believe, given the choices we have, will be Biden.
Okay. Greg, you want to respond?
I think that all politicians say whatever they need to say at any given moment to try to court votes. But I just the same, and I'm hesitant to say things that might cause your listeners to think, oh, he's just a Trump supporter. But I think the same way that Nixon, an arch-conservative Republican president, traveled to China and understanding declaration that Black Americans need some redress for the offenses that have been committed against them since the founding of the nation, and some steps have to be taken to close the wealth gap. It may be that in an effort to have a legacy or win an election, that we would get more out of him and his administration than we would Democrats. But nothing ventured, nothing gained. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. We have to open our mouths and talk with them, and that's what Ice Cube did. And so whether or not it's successful, I think the larger point is we have to engage insist that both parties engage with us. We have to seek engagement with both parties and not confine ourselves to the Democratic Party.
So Hugh, you see engaging Trump as a complete waste of time? Is that what you're saying?
Well, at this stage in the game, yes. We're what, 2 weeks out from an election.
Right.
I don't. The only thing that we can possibly hope to get from him is a statement that says yes, I agree, or yes, I support, or whatever. But he is not in a position at this point to do anything. And if he were to win, which I hope is not the case, but if he were to win, I think that would be the time to hold his feet to that fire and to say to him, well, here is what we need for you to do. But I would be interested as well in taking a look at what this contract says. I haven't read it. I only learned about it today.
Okay.
I have not seen it because I cannot imagine what is in this contract that has not been in the public conversations that we've been having for as long as I can remember in relation to the Black community. If we're talking about strategies for reducing disparities in health, strategies for reducing disparities in public education, strategies for improving access to opportunity for people of color in this country, if we're talking about reparations, if we're talking about strengthening and repairing and strengthening the Voting Rights Act, if we're talking at any of these levels, these
Right.
are conversations we've been having all along. So I would be very interested in seeing what it is that is in this contract that is new, that is new. I'd love to see that.
I guess just the idea that he is who he is doesn't that speak to what we've been talking about in terms of having money and having access and having power, so that a politician will listen to you? Because, like you said, these issues have been presented before, but they've fallen on deaf ears. So, is it possible that he's utilizing his celebrity for a good cause?
Well, I think the idea of utilizing celebrity for a good cause is an excellent one, and I am all in favor of celebrity and people of social prominence speaking out on issues of public interest and having their voices heard in corridors of power and engagement where ordinary people might not have access. I'm all in favor of that. I'm just intrigued by this idea of a contract with Black America. Unfortunately I have not yet read it. I would love to see what it is that is being asked for or demanded or proposed. I'd love to know what that says, because I cannot imagine what new thing would now be on the table.
Okay, all right.
Just in full disclosure, I have not read it either, but I think, again, that the larger issue is at least, getting, because contracts are negotiated and amended and changed and marked up anyway. So, whatever is in there in the first draft very rarely makes it to the final version. But I think, contract is more symbolic language, on the part, because he's a lay person, he's not an attorney, he's not a politician, and I think it's more akin to policy proposals, of things that can be done for the Black community. I mean, one of the issues, Hugh, you talked about disparities in public education, and one of the things that never ceases to irk me is that Republicans promote school choice, giving a distribution of vouchers to low-income, read Black families, which would enable those families to enroll their children in private schools, take their children out of failing public schools. And across the board, Democrats don't support school choice, seemingly, to my mind, because the union, the teachers' union, is a more powerful voting bloc and certainly a source of finances, many more campaigns than Black parents, and so I think that, and then that's part of not walking in lockstep with a particular party, because as Black people, as people of African descent, our issues are separate and distinct, and that's one of the things that Ice Cube has said in his public pronouncements, that when he's talking about a contract with Black America, not people of color, not
Right.
Biracial, indigenous, people of color, but black people, the descendants of enslaved Africans in the Americas. I say the Americas because descendants of enslaved Africans, to me, and obviously includes immigrants from the Caribbean and Central and South America, and that's where the interests of the larger Democratic Party and the Black community diverge. That our interests as a community are not the same as the typical union member. There might be overlap, but certainly our interests are separate and distinct and need to be addressed as separate and distinct issues, as opposed to a rising tide lifts all boats, like the Like we're just passengers in the democratic vote. And I think this is where we've been losing out generation after generation after generation. When we should be saying to the Democrats, listen, school choice affects our communities, and the Republicans are offering us that. You know, we want something other than just increased funding for public schools. We also want the option of, you know, that a parent could take his tax dollars and get a tax credit if he takes his children and sends them to a private school. You know, and that's we need, but we can't get that type of leverage without, again, you know, making ourselves open to engagement with the other party.
Well, Hugh, I'm sorry. I thought he was directing it to you, but yeah. I mean,
It was a comment, you know. Most
Okay.
of the, you know, it was a comment for you know, for you to comment on.
Well, look, the issue of school choice specifically, I tend in my approach to public policy, I tend not to look at things in a binary way, because to my mind, very few things are either or. Very often they are both and. On the matter of school choice, which I know is a hot button issue for some people are just resolutely and profoundly against school choice. Well, to my mind, it depends on how you define school choice. What do you mean by it? And how would it work? I have no problem, and I suspect that most reasonable people would not have a problem with a reasonable conversation on the subject. Exactly what do you mean by this? How would it work? What changes would we need to make to our public policy? How will we measure the effectiveness of this? What sorts of objectively verifiable indices of evaluation are we going to put into place? There is a very practical way in which we can approach some of these conversations. Unfortunately, I find that many people choose to get away from the conversation once you begin to get into the weeds. Now, Greg, you mentioned that the interests of Black people are different from or are unique in this country, and it goes without saying, of course, that people of African origin and descent, of people of African ancestry and descent, have had a unique experience in this country, and you know, that is not even arguable or debatable in any way. However, as a practical matter, the question of how do we begin to address that unique legacy and the specific needs of this community as distinct from any other community with which it might exist in alliance, that becomes a trickier question, which is, of course, the problem we run into with the debate on reparations. So I would be interested in hearing, for example, in what way, you know, an example of a way in which Black people who are identifiably Black are uniquely challenged in our modern society, and what would be an example of a response or a remedy to that particular or unique problem. I'd be interested in hearing about that.
Well, it's a situational analysis. I think let's say for example we can quantify that redlining occurred in the United States of America from the 1930s onward. Yeah, with the creation of federal housing programs that were designed to subsidize home ownership and designed to assist developers, that subsidies and monetary financial incentives were extended towards developers of housing developments and home builders for the last 60, 70, even 80 years. And, you know, we can, there are forensic historians, forensic accountants, forensic bookkeepers, can examine, who was rejected, how, which people of African descent applied for mortgages, went through the application process to purchase homes, to get subsidies that were made available by the Federal Housing Administration, and were denied, who applied to banks and were denied for mortgages because they purposed to, the loan was to ostensibly purchase a home in an area that, unbeknownst to them, was redlined by the bank. I believe a conversation about redress and reparations shouldn't go back to the way the law is set up in the United States of America, the way the civil procedure law is in the United States of America. There's no one living today under the current legal scheme who would be eligible for damages that an ancestor suffered by virtue of being held in bondage because of their race. That's just the way the law is set up. And so in terms of the law, the way the laws are written right now, reparations for damages because of slavery, it's a non-starter. People don't like to hear that. And I myself, only that realization dawned on me when I was in law school and actually had an opportunity to study law. But there are people living today who can show damages, meaning that they suffered harms because of actions of institutions and state and local governments within the last 70 years or so. And so it begins with an examination of in each particular forum or area of life where discrimination occurs, where we can pinpoint and identify people who have suffered those damages, and then an effort can be made to make them whole, whether it's through awarding money damages, if it's compelling performance of a particular act by an institution or a state actor, reversing some harm that was done to them through rules or procedures or legislative action by a state actor or by a private actor who's acting in place of the state. So that's where it would be a very focused, but again, focused in different areas. So in education, you can go through and use the same calculus that's done in a lawsuit. I applied to medical school in 1954. I had all the grades. I should have been admitted. I was denied because I was black. And now, had I graduated from medical school in 1958 and had a 42-year career as a doctor, my wages would have been X. So because that's a formula. They use actuarial tables, and these things are calculated in wrongful death lawsuits all the time. So it can be done, and so I think that and I venture to guess maybe when you can show that a particular person suffered a particular harm, instead of a big an amorphous general, we suffered, we might get more traction with that type of effort in white, with the dominant group, with white society. And again, these are brainstorming here, right? I'm just thinking about it as we talk.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you've given Kami there a topic for a future podcast,
right,
which is the issue of reparations, which is an issue about which I have. It fascinates me, and it is an issue that has become increasingly compelling to me, and I'd love to hear a further elaboration of your ideas in this area. I would just say, though, that when you say, and I respect the fact that, of course, as an attorney, I respect the fact that the way the law is set up, as you described it, is X. However, as a layperson, my response to the way the law is set up is that if the way the law is set up does not work in my interest, then change the law.
But Q, I want to be clear, yeah. Q, that's why my statement was the way the law is set up today.
Yes.
You know, and I said phrase it that way, allowing for change in the law.
Precisely, and we know, of course, that is entirely possible. The law used to be set up where black people were 3/5 of a person. The law used to be set up where we had a fugitive slave clause in our Constitution. Until 100 years ago, the law was set up so that women couldn't vote. Until 1965, we did, even though we had a 14th Amendment right to vote, or 15th Amendment eligibility to vote in the Constitution, as a practical matter, following the collapse of Reconstruction, that black people were subjected to 100 years of apartheid in this country, and Jim Crow segregation and apartheid, which essentially nullified any theoretical right of black men to vote. So the answer then, of course, would be to change the law. I remember back in 2008, when Obama was running for office, I had written a piece that I titled "The Arithmetic of Racial Authenticity," in which I explored this question of what it means to be black, and it is a subject that is very close to my heart as a person who defines himself as being black. Some people. I remember being on the radio one time and describing myself as African American, and you would not believe the torrent that followed, because there are people who said to me, "No, you can be black, but you can't be African American." And within our community, within our black community, these terms have very significant, weighted terms. And they carry tremendous meaning, and with good reason. And there are and some of these definitions are very closely guarded because of the politics of naming and the politics of identity. So I think that a conversation on the issue of reparations and how do we go about that, and how do we define who is eligible and so forth, that has to be the next step in our public conversation. Now, I know we were supposed to be talking about the election that's coming up, and I just remembered that the one thing we hadn't touched on yet was the Electoral College, because that is another example of how, in the case of the presidential election, we end up getting shafted, because the 4% of people of the population that lives in the least populated states end up getting a disproportionate voice in the Electoral College, accounting for about 8% of the electoral votes. For people who are not familiar with how that works, when we vote on November 3rd, as many people would recall, Al Gore got more votes in 2000 than George W. Bush, but he still lost the election in the Electoral College as a result of the fact that Florida went to Bush, was awarded to Bush with a difference of just about 500 votes, even though Al Gore had about 5 million more popular votes than did George W. Bush. Mm-hmm. We know that Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, but Donald Trump was the one who got to 271st in the Electoral College. And part of that is because of the crooked way in which that system is set up to protect the interests of a particular group of people who were in power, namely rich white men at the time that our Constitution was created. Now, for people who are not very familiar with this, as a quick example on how it is that our votes are not evenly weighted, and why it is then that you can have somebody losing the popular vote but winning in the electoral college. Let us take the case of Wyoming and Texas. Wyoming has a population of less than of a little over 500,000 people. As you know, one congressional district right now has about 710,000 people. So Wyoming has a total population that is less than the population of a single congressional district, as determined by the figures in the 2010 census. But yet, Wyoming has 3 representatives in Congress, two senators and a congressman, and the number of electoral votes they have is equal to the number of the persons in their congressional delegation. Texas has a population of about 32 million people, which of course is way greater. But what do we find is that the total number of electoral votes, I had made a note to myself in the electoral college, the total number of electoral votes that Texas has is 32. Texas has 32 electoral votes, okay, because they've got their population is about is roughly 25 million. So they've got 32 electoral votes compared to Wyoming's 3. But when you divide the total population when you divide the number of electoral votes by the number of electors, what you find is that you've got 1 elector in Wyoming for every 177,000 people, whereas in Texas you've got 1 elector for every 710,000 people. So the vote then in the electoral college for Wyoming is significantly greater. It's roughly 4 times each person in Wyoming, when he or she votes, is casting a vote that in the electoral college is about 4 times the value of the vote that is cast in Texas. I know this is not a good medium for this kind of arithmetic, but it's absurd, and it is one of the lingering legacies that we have that will continue to make quite frankly to make a mess of our presidential elections every 4 years. Some states have begun to talk about changing the law. Here again, we come to Gregory's point about the importance of state legislatures, because some states have begun to talk about passing law to make sure that their votes, that their electoral votes are appropriated to reflect the popular vote in the country, as opposed to in the state, as opposed to having all of the votes cast for whoever gets, the way that it works right now. And it's a complete mess. I know it's getting deep into the weeds,
right,
but that is definitely an issue about which we need to educate our population and begin to put some pressure on state legislatures to do the right thing and to either abolish or at the very least to reform the electoral college.
Well, listen, guys. I think you guys have given me an education here tonight. Just in terms of some of the deep concepts that you've shared in terms of voting in the election in 2 weeks. So I really want to thank you guys for coming in, because and especially the points that you made about the local election. I think that's very important because, like both of you said, we get caught up with the presidential election and we sometimes neglect what's happening locally. So unfortunately, we do have to wrap it up. It was always a pleasure talking to you guys. I always get an education when I talk to you. And if you want to, say any last statements, and then we'll go off. Any last things you guys want to say?
Well, I hope that we'll have another get together right after the election to discuss the election and
discuss the Civil War.
Very good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I enjoyed talking with you, Gregory. I am very happy to continue our conversations, and you've clearly given a lot of these issues very mature and very mature and deep thought, which is and I have certainly learned a lot as well listening to you and to your analysis. So I look forward to talking with you guys again sometime soon.
All right.
And thank you, Cami, for this forum for
Sure.
civil discussion, about the issues, and that's devoid of name calling and ad hominem attacks, and that's great. I appreciate that.
All right, guys. Listen, you guys take it easy, and we'll talk again. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have
All
a good
right.
night.
All right.
Good night, gentlemen.
All right.
All right.